I'm Forum BX257, your friendly neighborhood 1980s G.I. Joe reviewer, and today I'm going to be taking a look at my all-time favorite G.I. Joe licensed items, the die-cast miniatures made by Aviva in 1983. Now, the Aviva toy company is a little bit more famous for making little die-cast kitty cars of being driven by licensed characters from comic books and cartoons. You probably had one as a kid. You know, like a little dinky car with a bobblehead of maybe like Snoopy or Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny, something like that. Which probably accounts for the odd scale that these particular G.I. Joe miniatures are in. However, Aviva was also a subsidiary of Hasbro, which means that these are very accurate to their full-size action figure compatible compatriots. One very interesting thing is that I actively looked for these back in the 90s when I started seriously collecting G.I. Joes. Unlike a lot of the licensed items which just sort of happened upon, these I actively looked for. When I finally found the packaging, I was like, I don't remember the packaging looking like this from my childhood. I mean, it's beautiful packaging with the Marines at Iwo Jima inspired artwork, but I was like, that just doesn't ring the sort of nostalgia bell that I was getting. Of course, I'm Canadian, so I went through a few Canadian toy shows and eventually found this. This is what I remember these things looking like on my Canadian toy shelf racks. Now, these are a little bit more closer to what the card art and box art for the action figure line was, and I always really kind of gravitated towards that. There's nothing wrong with this, however. They're both beautiful. Which leads me to the question is, were these miniatures ever sold outside of North America? Because I can't find any evidence to that. Military miniatures are generally very collectible in England and Europe in general, so I'm really surprised that I can't find any evidence of an Action Force version of this.
First, we'll take a look at the largest and heaviest of the die-cast series, the Mobat. It actually did have a working tow hook, so you could hook it up to either the MMS or the Hell back there. Just what I have done right now. This miniature Mobat had fake dummy wheels underneath the non-rolling treads, but still rolled really well. It has the aforementioned working tow hook, as well as a rotating main turret, whose main cannon actually does elevate, and a rotating command turret. Now the main body is of course die cast, painted. The main turret is also die cast, as well as the command turret. The only things that are plastic are the cannon barrel, the treads. Unfortunately, the entire bottom portion is plastic, but it's still a really heavy little guy here. And here it is next to the full-size action figure version of the Mobat. The amount of detail on here perfectly replicates all the amounts of detail that was on here. You have the G.I. Joe logo on one side, just like we have here. And we have very minimal painted detail on here. As a matter of fact, all of the white detail is painted on, even though the G.I. Joe logo was a sticker. That's very odd that they chose to do that, but oh well. It works just fine, I suppose. Next, we'll take a look at what is pretty much the smallest of the die-cast set, the MMS. This tiny MMS is in its trailer form. You can fold down its front legs, and they kind of lock into place, and pull out and fold down the rear legs, just like the full-size MMS. You can also swivel the, actually raise and lower the missile base, as well as swivel it 360 degrees. Again, just like the full-size version. Now, despite being one of the smallest items, it almost has the same amount of features that the full-size one does. It's obviously missing the computer box and the stand, which pulls out of the back here. But each of the 3 missiles is removable. Unfortunately, that means that this is the hardest of the miniatures to find because, well, you always have one or maybe even all of these little missiles missing. The miniature is a very nice rendition of the full-size action figure version. As a matter of fact, not only is the detail on the surface of the miniature copied from here, they've even copied some of the detail on the bottom as well, like that odd fan detail here, which is totally on the full-size one. They didn't have to do that, but they did anyway. All of the metal on here is just in the base, both top and bottom this time, as well as the base here. Everything else is unfortunately plastic, but that's okay. Now let's take a look at the Flak attack cannon. Despite a great likeness to its full-size version, the engineering for the miniature Flak is actually a little bit disappointing. Not only does this thing only elevate and raise, it doesn't actually swivel on its base. And that's because of the odd locking system. This thing came in pieces for you to assemble out of the package, which was different from all the other versions. You simply took it out of the package and started playing with it. This one you actually had to assemble it because of its very awkward shape. And as you can see, one of these lengths is longer than the other, and yet the actual cutouts are the same thing. So when you put this thing in here, it doesn't really lock into its base. It just sort of static there. The feet don't move either. As a matter of fact, the original had a ratcheting system going up and down, whereas this has nothing like that. It does, however, have a lot of metal on here. The bottom base is metal, and so is the entire upper end. It's only the feet and the chair which is plastic. Again, they didn't cheap out on any of the detail going from large to small. This really does look like a miniature version of this. But unfortunately, there's only two colors being used for the miniatures, a light green and a medium green, whereas the Flak was actually a dark green. So they didn't actually go with that third paint choice. And now let's take a look at the Ram motorcycle. The miniature Ram is a very nice replica of its full-size version, and it has a lot of metal on top of that. The side gun and its barrel are metal, and so is the main body. The only thing that are plastic is the front cowling and the wheels, and that's it. This thing is actually fairly heavy for its size. Unfortunately, all this thing does is roll. It doesn't have a front turning fork. It doesn't have a kickstand. The side machine gun is not removable, and neither are saddlebags. Unfortunately, this thing also does suffer from a slight engineering flaw as well. If you put it down straight, I don't believe the side machine gun is actually low enough, or maybe the wheel is not low enough or something, because it kind of leans towards that way. It kind of means that if you're kind of rolling this thing along, it has a tendency to kind of turn in that direction. And here it is next to its full-size version. And I have to admit that the bars which hold the side cannon to the main body are pretty much exactly where they are on this version, and yet this is pretty much straight. And this one isn't, so I'm not quite sure where the scaling went wrong. Everything looks in proportion, but this one leans to the side and the full-size version doesn't. It's really kind of strange. Next we'll take a look at probably what is the most popular of all of the die-cast set. The Vamp. It had a working tow hook, so you could hook it up to either the HAL or the MMS. Really nice likeness, despite the fact that there isn't a lot of surface detail like the other toys. But this thing rolls really well. thanks to the proportionately made wheels. And of course, it does have an axle, like all proper rolling toys ought to. So this thing rolls just like the original, free rolls very well. Unfortunately, the only other feature it has is the cannon, which elevates and depresses, and of course swings all around on a little base. Unfortunately, the molded in gas tanks are not removable. As a matter of fact, the cannon is actually very fragile, being held on by little clock clips on a bar on the base. So be very careful if you find one of these on the aftermarket, not to be too abusive to pulling this thing up and down or rotating it side to side, because it can just crack off really. The Vamp also has quite a lot of metal on it. The whole upper body is metal, as well as the lower body as well, which is very nice. Just the roll cage, the cannon and its base, and the wheels, those are the only things that are plastic. Like I said, the miniature copies the Vamp look very well, although proportionately the cannon on this is a tiny bit bigger than how it would be on here. But when has bigger cannons ever been a problem? The only other detail which is of course missing is the colored hubcaps, which would have had to have been a separate part on here. I don't really miss them, however. And finally, my favorite, the HAL, the only die-cast miniature to replicate each and every one of the features of its full-size action figure version, which is in its trailer form here. All you have to do is spread its front legs out, pull out its rear third leg, and now it's in its firing version, just like the full-size version. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned before, this thing has all the same features that the full-size one does. It can also rotate on its base and elevate and depress. But listen to this. Anybody who knows me knows that I don't like the way that the action figure version of the HAL has a kind of the nasty plastic on metal clicker. I don't like plastic on metal, and I don't like plastic on plastic. But I do like metal on metal, the way this is. This sounds like a real tool. That's what I want to hear when something ratchets and makes a noise. It should sound like quality. And that's quality. Now this thing also has a lot of great detail replicated from the original, and a lot of metal. This whole thing is metal. Even the barrel tips are metal. I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't swap that out for plastic, but that's metal. The entire bottom portion of the cannon is metal, and they've again replicated some detail from the bottom of the full-size one, which they didn't have to. And this portion here is metal. And the arms are plastic, and the rear is also plastic as well. Now, in addition to, in my opinion, a better way of clicking, the third leg is also a C-clip onto the back bar here, whereas the full-size one had a strange sort of a gravity-fed type of deal, which honestly, it falls out quite a bit. I mean, I'm certain you can pull this thing off or even break it because it's so small and tiny. But at least this holds on quite a bit better than the full-size one does. It's just interesting that they've made that improvement. And here it is next to its full-size version. A very nice duplication of all the tiny little details that were on the full-size version to the miniature. And these are very crisp details despite the fact that it's all painted over. Unfortunately, like the Flak, this thing is actually done in dark green, whereas they only went with two different colors for the miniatures, and that's in its regular medium green. And using the HAL as an example, here is the differences between the US and Canadian packages again. And if you're wondering whether the toy inside was any different for the Canadian version, well, no, unfortunately it is not. It still has the exact same United States stuff on there, so the paint scheme was exactly the same. Take a look at the back. And the Canadian version just has added French to the English. Although oddly enough, the proof of purchase looks a bit more like the ones that you find on the card, rather than the US version, which has this sideways one. And speaking of the back of the card, you notice that they also included in the collection roster the actual item numbers. You have 4-5, 4-6, 4-7, 4-8, 4-9, 5-1. What happened to 5-0? Now, while you might be thinking that, oh, they only replicated 6 of the 7 1982 vehicles made at the time, but I don't think that a die-cast jetpack would have gone over very well. The 5-0 is actually something very special. This is the 5-0 item number, a die-cast 3-pack. Now, as you can see, I have the Canadian version, but it's in the sky blue color with the painted G.I. Joe artwork, which closely replicates the US packaging instead of the Canadian dark black and explosion background, which was emulating the action figure card art and action figure vehicle boxes. Really not quite sure why they went and did that, but there it is. Also, this only included the Vamp, the Ram, and the Howl. Oddly enough, they never made a 3-pack for the remaining 3 vehicles in the set. Again, that's really quite strange. If you're looking for a way to both store and display your die-cast G.I. Joe miniatures, may I suggest trying to track one of these Army Invasion roll-o-mats down. They work excellently. The roll-o-mat might have been made for your standard 1-inch plastic armament figures, but this thing looks like it was made for the die-cast G.I. Joe miniatures. Despite the trouble of finding scale vehicles to put with your G.I. Joe die-cast miniatures back in the 80s, you don't have that problem now. Especially finding a Cobra to fight against, thanks to Running Press's Mini Cobra Hiss tank. As a matter of fact, they don't look too bad with the 1988-89 Micro Figure Collection figures either. What? does have a tow hook, so you can hook it on. And the die-cast version of the store and display your military. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.